Hello there, and welcome. It's lovely to have you here. Whether you've come to rest, to dream, or just to soften the edges of a long day, I invite you to settle in for a quiet moment together. Tonight, we'll take a slow, gentle journey into the past, through winding alleyways, silent looms, and forgotten gardens, where lives once unfolded with the same rhythms that soothe us now. There's no rush here, no urgency, just the soft murmur of history, told like a lullaby for grown hearts. If you find comfort in these quiet hours, you're very welcome to like or subscribe, but only if it feels right to you. This space is meant to be gentle, never demanding, and if you'd like, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. There's something quietly beautiful about knowing we're all drifting together, across oceans, cities, and time zones, with nothing more than the story between us. So go ahead, make yourself a warm drink, pull a blanket a little closer, let your body grow heavy and your breath slow. I'll be right here, and when you're ready, we'll begin, together, right at the edge of the dream. Now, let's step softly into the world of the Persian carpet weavers, where memory lives in thread, and silence has its own color. You wake to the sound of breath, not your own, but the long, steady exhale of a clay stove 3 rooms away, where the embers from yesterday's fire are being coaxed gently back into life. The room you sleep in is made of pressed earth and pale lime, and the walls still hold the cool breath of night. You shift beneath a rough cotton blanket and rub at your eyelids, feeling the faint grit of dry dye, remnants of yesterday's rinsing. Outside, a lone bird is already calling from the rooftop well. Your name is Zara. You are 23 years old. This is the house your mother was born in, though you've only lived here a year. Before this, you traveled with your uncle's trade caravan between Shiraz and Isfahan, selling spun wool and cheap copper mirrors, eating rice from folded cloth, sleeping beside the hooves of beasts. But now, after your father's passing, you've returned. And here, in this quiet village east of Isfahan, beneath the red clay ridges of the central plateau, you have found a different rhythm, slower, softer. A life built not on the dust of roads, but on the silence between knots. You live in a modest courtyard home, a square of swept earth, a fig tree in one corner, and a low roofline trimmed with clay drain spouts. The loom rests in the southern veranda, beneath a slanted beam of early sun. You can smell wool soap from the basin behind the house, where the youngest girls are already up, scrubbing fleece on flat stones with stiff fingers. You sit up and wrap your chadder loosely over your hair. A breeze slips through the window slats, and with it comes the scent of warm bread, sun-dried sheep dung, and crushed thyme underfoot. The day begins. In the next room, your Aunt Fatme hums softly through her teeth as she slices cold cucumbers into a clay bowl. She is nearly 50 but moves like water, always bending or kneading or folding something, her hands worn into beautiful, deliberate shapes. Her face is round, and her voice is steady, sometimes so steady that you don't notice the music in it until it's already faded. She glances over as you appear in the doorway. "You're awake early," she says, handing you a corner of flatbread that's still steaming. The water is cold, good for the eyes. You crouch beside her on the rug and eat in silence for a while. The bread is soft, scented with wild fennel, and faintly smoky at the edges. You dip a piece into thick goat yogurt, sprinkled with sumac and crushed mint. Around you, the house murmurs, the slap of wet fleece, the scrape of a broom against earth, the bubbling of a dye pot somewhere beyond the gate. Fatme passes you a small earthenware cup filled with saffron water. "Only 1 drop left," she says. The jar is almost empty again. You nod. You've been meaning to go to New Julfa, where the Armenian merchants sell saffron in tiny muslin sachets, folded like letters. But the road is long, and your loom is half finished. Still, you tuck the thought away. Maybe tomorrow. Outside, the sky turns from clay gray to the color of washed apricots. A camel bell rings somewhere far off. A boy's voice shouts about bread. The rug frame waits. You cross the courtyard barefoot, the ground still cool under your soles. Near the fig tree, a pale wool bundle is drying on a reed mat, its strand stiff and clumped from last night's rinse. You run your fingers through it, breaking the knots gently apart, letting the sun catch on the damp curls. The loom sits low on its frame, a horizontal rectangle stretched tight, with warped threads like a harp. Your mother began this one before the illness took her. 5 rows complete, a delicate lattice of cypress trees and border medallions. You've picked up where she left off. It is slow work, each knot tied by hand, each thread of weft pressed tight with a bone comb that once belonged to her. You settle cross-legged onto the cushion. The air smells of wet stone and rosewater ash. The shuttle lies where you left it. Beside you on a tray are the dyed skeins, deep indigo, walnut brown, soft madder red. No gold today. It's too expensive. Your fingers begin. One thread. Pull tight. Press. Breathe. The rhythm comes back like prayer. Just before mid-morning, a familiar sound drifts in through the garden gate. Bare feet on gravel. And then the voice. Zarajan. You turn to see Amina, your cousin. 3 years younger, sharp-eyed, impossibly quick-fingered, carrying a basin of rinsed wool and a mouthful of laughter. I told them you'd already started. You never wait for me. I left you the warm bread. You reply. Fate may hid it under the cloth. She drops the basin and kneels beside you, her chatter falling off one shoulder. Her fingers are stained with walnut dye, her nails rimmed with saffron gold. I dreamt of the border last night, she says, pulling a skein of red from the tray, the one with the broken flowers. Your mother used to say it was unlucky. It's not broken, you reply. It's weeping. Amina smirks, but gently. Weeping borders still get sold. You nod. The merchant in Isfahan doesn't care whether a flower bends in grief or wilts from a miscount. He only checks the symmetry, the tightness of knots, the clarity of the center medallion. Still, you like to think that someone, somewhere will feel it, that maybe a bride in Tabriz or a scholar in Mashhad will kneel to pray and wonder why this one blossom curls inward, slightly away from the rest. I'll fix it, she says. Don't, you reply. Let's speak. Together, you work in quiet tandem, side by side on the loom. The air warms. Bees drift in and out of the fig blossoms. You hear the laughter of village boys somewhere on the ridge. Amina hums something tuneless. Her rhythm is faster than yours, but she waits at each row's end, never saying so. At mid-morning, Fate May brings bowls of warm lentils and flatbread with onion and mint. You eat in the shade, and she tells a story, half real, half remembered, about a woman whose husband was eaten by wolves, but who wove his memory into a rug and sold it to a prince. The prince wept when he saw it, though he didn't know why. He must have been a man with secrets, Fate May says, or grief. You don't say anything, but you think of your father, of his quiet sighs as he counted coins at dusk, of his woolen coat, still hanging behind the door. After the meal, you and Amina return to the loom. The light shifts. The sun slants across your hands, picking out the sheen in the indigo and the dull glow in the madder red. The knots blur into rhythm. Every so often, you glance to the left, to the 5 rows your mother completed. Her knots were tighter than yours. Her red had a different tone, deeper, like dried cherries. You wonder if your hands will ever match hers. But then Amina's elbow brushes yours, and she whispers, "Look, yours curve better, like vines." You smile, quietly, and let the moment stay. Outside, someone begins to beat wool on a stone. Dull thuds, steady, almost like a drum. The fig tree creaks. A breeze brings the scent of indigo and the faint bitterness of overboiled lentils from someone's distant pot. Midday nears. Your fingers begin to ache, a low heat in your knuckles. You pause and rest your hands in your lap. Amina leans back too, stretching her legs with a yawn. From the rooftop, Fate May calls out that she's heating water for tea. You nod, though she can't see you. The courtyard shimmers. The loom lies still. You close your eyes for a moment. The knots are done for now. The pattern waits. You breathe, in and out. Tomorrow will come with new colors, new threads. But for now, You rest beneath the shade of the fig tree, your hands still scented with wool and madder, your ears full of the loom's fading hum. And the day unfolds slowly, like a carpet turned face up in the sun. The sun rises higher, spilling over the courtyard walls like warm milk. You have moved from the loom to the cool, shaded corner beneath the fig tree, where the earth is packed firm and the woven reed mat bears the imprint of your crossed legs. The loom rests unfinished, its threads exhaling gently in the breeze, like something alive and half asleep. The day has slowed. You can feel it. The birds grow quieter. The sounds of labor soften into a hush of water and cloth, and the low hum of conversation from neighboring courtyards. You sip your tea slowly. It is not the sharp, bitter kind of men drink in the bazaar, but a gentler brew, steeped with dried orange peel and mint, sweetened with a touch of grape molasses. Fate May had carried the tray down from the rooftop, with both hands wrapped in cloth, careful not to spill. The glasses clinked like soft bells, and the steam carried the smell of sugar, citrus, and ash. You cradle your glass with both hands. It warms your palms, soothes the ache that lingers in your fingers from the morning's work. Amina lies beside you on the mat, her eyes half-lidded, a piece of thread still curled around her index finger. "It's too hot to think," she murmurs. You smile, then don't. She closes her eyes completely. Her chest rises and falls, slow and even. A bead of sweat glints at her temple. Somewhere above you, the fig leaves flutter. The breeze returns, dust-scented and tired. This is the hour when the village exhales. There are no carts in the alleys, no footfall on the hard-packed paths. Even the sheep seem to have vanished, tucked away behind adobe walls or shaded by stacks of straw. You hear only the faint splash of water, the creak of a shutter, the distant clang of a dive at being stirred. You lean your head back against the trunk of the fig tree. It is warm, smooth, older than you remember it being. The leaves above shift in green fragments against the sky, so bright it feels nearly white. This is the hour the world tilts slightly toward silence. Your mind drifts, not backward, not forward, but somewhere in between, to the memory of your father's last journey, when he took the caravan north, chasing a better deal for his wool. He wrote you a letter from Kham, folded inside a scrap of undyed cloth. You kept it for weeks in your sash, until the ink bled and the words vanished. But you remember the last line clearly. "Zarjan, look after your mother's loom. It remembers her hands better than I do." You still think about that, about what the loom knows, what the thread remembers, about the way each weaver's tension lives in the rug like a secret, slightly tighter, slightly looser, depending on the day, the weather, the mood. And sometimes you wonder if someone far away, someone you will never meet, will one day kneel on this carpet and feel that memory, not in the pattern, but in the rhythm. The warmth of the tea fades. You set the glass down. Amina stirs and rolls onto her back, one arm flung over her eyes. "I dreamt last night I was a carpet," she says softly, as if confessing. You glance over. I was rolled tight. I could feel the dust and sun. People stepped on me, preyed on me, spilled pomegranate juice on my border, and I didn't mind. Why not? Because I was beautiful, and I was warm. You chuckle, but not unkindly. You make a good rug. I'd make a temperamental rug. One corner would always curl. You imagine it now. A carpet with Amina's laugh in its fringe, her impatience in its border, her dreams knotted into the dark threads at the center. Fate May appears again at the edge of the courtyard, holding a small wooden tray stacked with dry wool. Her sleeves are rolled up, her cheeks shine with sweat. "The indigo bath is ready," she says. You rise. The dye house is not far, just 2 alleys over, past a crooked wall hung with gourds and a black dog that sleeps in the same patch of dust every day. The dye house belongs to the Zanjani family, and though their boys are loud and often careless, their vats are clean and their color deep. Fate May had arranged it earlier this week, 3 skeins for dyeing, in trade for a small border repair on one of their prayer rugs. The 3 of you walk there slowly, the wool tucked under your arms, wrapped in a length of old cotton cloth. The heat presses against your skin like thick fabric. The alleys are silent, but for the low hum of flies and the occasional creak of a door. At the dye house, you are greeted by silence. The boys are gone for the moment, off to fetch vinegar, perhaps, or more firewood. But the vats are simmering. One of them, wide and black, exudes a pungent, almost sour aroma, the unmistakable perfume of fermenting indigo. You approach it reverently. The indigo dye is alive. It breathes. You've been told that if you lean too close, it will whisper. Fate May unwraps the skeins. Amina lifts the first and lowers it slowly into the vat, her arms steady, her eyes narrowed against the steam. The wool disappears into the blue-black surface, like a secret being swallowed. You've always found this part of the process strange and beautiful, the way the color is invisible at first, how the wool emerges a sickly green, only to turn deep blue in the air, like a mood changing its mind. As the skein is lifted out, steam rises in thick, ghostly coils. The wool drips, and slowly, breath by breath, it shifts, green to blue, pale to rich, air and time and sunlight doing their alchemy. You hold the second skein and feel its weight, its wet promise. It will be used for the prayer arch in the next carpet, a deep, symmetrical blue that draws the eye inward like a pool. You tie a small knot in the end, just as your mother used to remind yourself where the center begins. A third skein is dipped, then all are hung to dry, strung from wooden beams like ribbons from some silent celebration. The heat is heavier now. The air buzzes. Your head feels light from the smell of vinegar and lye. You press your palms to the cool stone basin nearby and splash your face with water. The relief is immediate. Fate May takes her sandals off and sits on a low bench, fanning herself with a folded scrap of newspaper. The blue always takes best in this heat, she says, half to herself. The dye is awake. You sit beside her. The courtyard is quiet. The dyed skeins sway gently in the sun, dripping color into the dust. Amina hums again, the same tuneless rhythm from earlier, though now it sounds slower, softer, like she's listening for something in herself. You close your eyes, and in the stillness, you think of all the colors in your life. The red of your mother's shawl, the gold thread in your father's prayer cap, the green-tinted jars of pickles on the pantry shelf, the soft brown of Fate May's hands, the silver of Amina's laugh, and now this impossible blue, born of rot and patience and fire. You stay like this for a while, until the sun begins to tilt again, and the breeze shifts just slightly, and the sound of returning footsteps marks the day's quiet turning. Fate May stands, will carry them back before the wind rises. You nod, and as you gather the drying skeins, warm and wet and heavy in your arms, you feel something shift quietly inside you. Not a thought, not quite a feeling, just the faint, invisible weight of a life woven slowly through time. Thread by thread, the sun has drifted west, though you didn't see it move. You only felt the change in the air, how the heat loosened its grip on your shoulders, how the fig tree's shade grew longer and quieter, how the light no longer landed in your eyes, but on your hands. You're home again. The skeins of indigo-dyed will now hang in your own courtyard, draped over a stretched rope between two posts. They drip slowly into the earth, each blue drop darkening the dust, like ink stains on a forgotten page. You and Amina have twisted the skeins carefully, looping them loosely to breathe. Fate May passed a ribbon of smoke under them from a handful of burning herbs, a quiet blessing to ward off moths, envy, or bad dreams. No one speaks for a while. It is the hour of silence, not solemnity, but stillness. The hour where thoughts curl like cats' tails and breath slows without command. You sit on a low stool and comb through a smaller skein with your fingers. The fibers are soft now, still damp, but yielding. They smell of iron and sun and something older, a scent you've never been able to name, only recognize. The smell of change, of time entering cloth. Amina has fetched a basin and is rubbing her feet. Her face is tilted skyward, eyes closed, a towel draped lazily across her knees. She is barefoot, her slippers abandoned beside the fig tree. The wind lifts the edge of her sleeve and reveals the lightest trace of henna across her wrist, faded from weeks ago, from some cousin's wedding, now remembered more by the dye than the memory. Fate May hums again as she waters the climbing vines near the back wall. The gourd leaves are large and shaggy, their undersides pale with dust. She pours carefully, saying nothing to the plants, but giving them her patience. She always waters them at this hour, when the sun has softened. She says it teaches the roots to wait. Beyond the walls, you hear a mule's bray, a wooden door shutting, a pot being set down hard against stone. No voices, just the grammar of late afternoon, punctuated, deliberate, restful. You lean back and close your eyes. For a moment you're back on the road, a memory rising uninvited. A dawn outside Yazd, the caravan just stirring. Your uncle brushing snow from a saddle with his bare palm. You were 16 then, and freezing and exhilarated. You wore 2 scarves and still shivered. You recall the crunch of frost beneath your boots, and the way the rising sun struck the snowy ridgeline gold. You had no loom then, no pattern, no knot. Only the road and the pack animals and the trade books your uncle let you carry. Now your world is smaller, but not lesser. Here, the rhythm isn't hoofbeats, but warp and weft. Not snow, but dust. Not motion, but return. You open your eyes again. Fate May is trimming dried rose petals. Amina has moved to the loom, idly twisting a strand of undyed wool through her fingers. Not knotting yet, just touching. You stand slowly and walk over. I want to try the new indigo, you say. Amina smiles. Now, yes. You retrieve one of the lighter skeins and sit before the loom. The sun glints off the metal comb, which still rests beside the threads. You reach into the warp and feel the familiar pull of tension. Taut but flexible, a living line. The first few knots are uneven. Your fingers are stiff from the day's work, but the wool is smooth, and your hands remember their purpose. You find your rhythm again by the 5th knot, and the 7th feels right. You're working the arch now. The prayer niche, the part of the rug that gives it meaning. The cypress trees rise along the borders. The flowers bloom in regulated turns. And here the space opens, a mirab, a symbolic dome drawn in wool, a miniature sky. In this rug, it will be indigo. Each knot you tie draws the shape a little closer to presence. You do not rush. Amina watches quietly, passing you skeins when needed, trimming ends. Fate May brings a small bowl of apricots and sets them by the wall. You tie, you press, you breathe, and gradually, the arch begins to speak. It will take weeks, of course, to complete. The dome rises knot by knot, line by line, like a call to prayer stretched over silence. But even now, with the faintest outline visible in the field of knots, you can see it. Not just the shape, but the stillness it will hold. This will be a rug for prayer. You've known it since the first time your hands touched your mother's original lines. The proportions told you. The balance. The care. She had chosen to begin a rug for someone's devotion. Not profit, not parade, not dowry. A rug for solitude. You hope, wherever it ends up, it will keep that spirit. That someone will kneel on it, eyes closed, forehead pressed to wool, and feel the whisper of hands that came before theirs. Yours, your mother's, Amina's, all stitched silently into its thread. The sun is slipping again, now behind the western wall. The light turns golden and soft. The wool catches it in places, glinting briefly like polished stone. You stop, not because you are tired, though you are, but because it feels like the right moment. A breath in the middle of a sentence. A pause, not an end. Amina stands beside you and sets a folded cloth over the loom. Tomorrow, she asks. You nod. Fate May is preparing the evening meal. You can hear her in the kitchen alcove, slicing onions, grinding dried mint in the mortar. The scent of frying garlic drifts into the courtyard, followed by the sharper tang of vinegar and crushed lentils. Your stomach wakes gently, but your body stays slow. You rise, wash your hands with the water set in the basin, and watch the color bleed faintly from your palms. Blue stains, indigo ghosts. You leave them, Dinner is soft barley soup with fried onions, flatbread still warm, yogurt with cucumber and dill. Fate May sits with her legs tucked to the side, sipping quietly between spoonfuls. Amina dunks her bread too long, and it falls apart in her bowl. Your hands are too fast, Fate May says. Not when I'm weaving, Amina replies. You smile quietly. The sky darkens. The call to prayer drifts in from the mosque on the far hill, faint but clear, a voice rising and falling like a ribbon caught in wind. You listen. You do not rise to pray yet. Later, perhaps, when the courtyard is quiet again, Fate May lights the lamp, a simple oil flame behind colored glass. The red and amber glows against the wall, flickering like a story half remembered. Shadows move gently across the rug. Amina stretches out on the mat and closes her eyes. The night is still warm, but no longer oppressive. A breeze returns. You hear someone in the alley laugh, a short, muffled sound, and then the rustle of water being poured. You lie back slowly. Above you, the sky is a deep blue now, with the first stars peeking through like old friends returning quietly after a long absence. Your body aches in soft, bearable places, shoulders, wrists, fingers. The ache of use, not harm. The ache of doing. You think of the loom, of the thread, of the arch rising, day by day, and you feel, for a moment, not tired, but full. The sky darkens further, and the courtyard settles into silence again. You close your eyes, and the world continues, quietly, without needing you to move. The stars are clearer now. Not many, but enough. Enough to suggest a sky that stretches beyond the village, beyond the hills, beyond the dreams tucked inside each house's sleeping walls. You lie in the courtyard beside Amina, your head resting on a rolled wool shawl, the earth still warm beneath your back. The fig tree is quiet. Its leaves do not rustle now. They only shift when the breeze sighs gently through the gate. Overhead, a bat sweeps past, just once, quick and soundless, a soft streak of movement across indigo sky. You follow its path with your eyes and feel the weight of night settling on your chest like a cotton sheet. Fate May has gone inside. You can hear her voice faintly, reciting a line of prayer, or perhaps talking to herself as she stacks the bowls. It's hard to tell. Her voice, even when alone, always sounds like it belongs to a rhythm older than words. Amina stirs. Tell me something, she says, still facing the stars. What kind of something? A story. A thing I haven't heard before. You think for a moment. You don't want to break the quiet with anything too loud, too full of plot or noise. So you speak in low tones, slowly, like someone laying down stitches in a hem. There's a legend from Tabriz, you begin, about a rug that took 40 years to weave. It was made by one woman in secret, in a windowless room beneath her uncle's dye house. She was never married, and no one ever visited her except the man who brought her food. He never spoke, only left the bowls by the door. Amina turns her head to look at you, her brows raised. They say the rug was wider than a room. You continue. Knotted so tight the weft couldn't be seen, and every thread was dyed from something real. Red from her own crushed pomegranates, blue from dried indigo she grew in a pot on the windowsill, yellow from her saffron rations. They say when she died, the carpet was found still on the loom, unfinished, the last row only half-tied. And what happened to it? No one knows. Some say it was sold to a merchant in Basra. Others say it was buried with her. But few say it still exists, hidden under glass, in a palace in Kashin. Not displayed, not walked on, just preserved. Amina lets the silence fall again. She doesn't ask if it's true. Neither do you. The best stories aren't for believing or doubting. They're for remembering. From somewhere in the alley, a dog gives a soft, half-hearted bark. Then nothing. The air smells of clay and smoke, and the faint trace of saffron still clinging to your fingers. You rise slowly, leaving the shawl behind, and walk to the veranda. The loom stands there, silent but present, its form half lit by the red lantern, hanging just above. You run your hand lightly along the side, not touching the threads, only the frame. The knots are all asleep now. The tension, the labor, the rhythm, it can wait until morning. You look beyond the loom, to the wall where your mother's old measuring string still hangs, a frayed red cord, marked every hand's width with faded black ink. You haven't used it since she passed. You prefer your own pace, your own guesswork, but you haven't taken it down either. It stays like a witness. You turn back and rejoin Amina. She is half dreaming now, her eyes open but unfocused, her breathing slow. The night continues. Fate May returns briefly, only to place a bowl of soaked raisins near the water basin, a treat for the morning. She smiles at you as she passes, says nothing. Her face is softened by the lantern's glow. The lines at her eyes do not look tired, only familiar. You whisper a quiet salawat and dip your hands into the basin to rinse them again. The water is cold now. The dust leaves your skin reluctantly. You light a second lantern, one with pale green glass, and hang it near the fig tree. Its glow is fainter than the red one, but soothing, like jade and fog. It's an old family habit. Green lanterns at night for health, your grandmother used to say. Red for strength, blue for memory. You've never questioned it. With the courtyard bathed in this dim, colored light, the shadows shift. The walls seem softer. The woven mat ripples like water, and the rugs laid out across the floor, the old ones, faded from years of bare feet and monsoon rain, seem to breathe. You lie down again. Above you, the stars have multiplied. You find the Pleiades, dim but steady. The shepherds say that if the cluster disappears, so too will the rains. You count the stars aloud, softly. 6, maybe 7, if you squint. Amina murmurs something in her sleep. Her hand twitches once, then stills. The rug beneath you is rough and familiar. A travel rug, thick and simple without flourish. You know each stain by memory. The saffron one near the corner. The tear mended with dark thread where a coal once fell. It has carried you across mountains, across cities, and now here, it carries you into rest. You close your eyes. The world fades into warmth, into silence, into slow breath and distant sound. Somewhere, water drips from a rooftop into a clay pot. Somewhere, a nightjar calls. You are not weaving now, but you feel it still, the pattern of the day behind you, laid out in soft rows. Tea in the morning, wool in the sun, indigo dreams, barley and breath, stars on your skin. You sleep, and the loom sleeps too, until the morning calls again. The gardens behind the Ali Capo Palace were quiet that morning, not silent. Isfahan never truly was, but quiet in a particular way. The kind of hush that settles when sunlight first slips through latticework and glances off polished tile. The sycamore trees lining the courtyard wall had just begun to rustle with the day's first breath of wind, and somewhere near the colonnade, a servant swept the flagstones with soft, deliberate strokes. A fountain bubbled gently in the center of the garden, not for grandeur, though it was finely carved, but for balance. Its sound echoed beneath the arcade, blending with the splash of birds in its shallow basin. Beneath one of the pavilions, seated not on a throne but on a simple wooden bench cushioned with hand-woven cloth, the Shah sat alone. Abbas, son of Kotobanda, the Safavid king who had outlived most of his friends, most of his rivals, and soon enough, most of his sons. He wore no crown, only a deep crimson robe, finely cut and lined with lamb's wool, and a sash dyed in a blue so rich it caught the light like still water. On his head sat a modest felt cap with a single feather pinned to its side, and in his hands, calloused, not as soft as one might expect, he held a length of carpet wool. It was dyed with indigo and walnut, the color of shadow and stone. He twisted it idly between his fingers, not in impatience, but in thought. The courtyard before him belonged to the palace, but the garden within had been planted by a weaver's son. Abbas remembered him, young, dark-haired, too eager to speak, and always barefoot, even among court architects. The boy had grown into a man and laid out the beds of this garden with the same geometry he used in his loom, for sections for the 4 rivers of paradise, split by a cross-shaped path. He planted saffron and cypress, jasmine and pomegranate, and laid pale gravel in the gaps between them. Now, in the early hours, the scent of crushed herbs lifted faintly in the breeze. Abbas breathed in through his nose and let it out slow. He had not intended to come here today. His advisors had called for a review of the Shervan border and demanded decisions on a new canal, but he had waved them away with a quiet gesture and walked, unguarded, from his chamber down through the halls, past the tiled diwan, and into the garden. Some mornings asked for stillness, and the king, if he was clever, did not ignore such a request. At his feet lay a carpet half unrolled, not for display, but for mending. It had been woven years ago in Kashan, under a master whose name Abbas no longer recalled. Its medallion pattern was elaborate, a wheel of stars set against a red field, its border woven with curving tendrils and cypress trees bowed in stylized reverence. Time had dulled its colors, but not its dignity. One edge had frayed from where near the mosque steps, where visiting dignitary had allowed his horse to tread too far. A palace steward had nearly discarded it. Abbas had retrieved it himself. He reached now for a second skein of thread, dyed with madder root, and pressed the two colors together, comparing warmth, texture, hue. A court artisan would complete the repair, of course. Abbas had no illusions about his own craftsmanship, but he wanted to see it first, to feel the damage, to remember. He had built this empire in many ways, on war, yes, and diplomacy, and the slow, necessary erosion of power from those who clung to old orders, but also through image, through texture, through pattern. A carpet was more than a floor covering. It was memory made visible, and Abbas had laid them down across Persia like quiet declarations, beneath the feet of pilgrims in Mashhad, under tea trays in caravansaries along the Silk Road, in mosques, merchant halls, shrines, even beneath the boots of foreign ambassadors who believed they walked on mere ornament. He remembered gifting a carpet to the Mughal court once, 30 feet long, dyed entirely in cochineal red, with gold thread at the corners and a Quranic verse hidden in the vinework. The envoy had unfurled it in the Diwan Ikaz and called it divine. He had not noticed the Safavid lion tucked behind the central rosette. That was fine. The carpet remembered. The sun climbed higher now, soft and wide as it rose above the palace walls. Light filtered through the trellis, dappling the gravel, glinting off Abbas's silver beard. A soft footstep stirred the silence. Abbas looked up but did not speak. A man stood at the edge of the path, slim, with coal dark eyes and a writing tablet under his arm. He bowed low. Sadr al-Mulk, Abbas said, nodding once. You're early. I did not expect your majesty to be alone. Neither did I, Abbas replied. Sadr al-Mulk remained quiet. He had served the court long enough to understand when words were unnecessary. The Shah gestured to the carpet. Do you know how many knots per square inch? The scribe tilted his head slightly. 300, perhaps. 372, Abbas said. It took 5 weavers 3 years. One of them was 12. She tied the sky band. You can see where her hands began to falter. There, just above the center. The scribe followed the Shah's gaze. The weakness in the thread, he asked. No, Abbas said. The tenderness. They sat in silence for a while. The Shah leaned forward, brushed a stray pebble from the carpet's edge, and rested his palm on the repaired seam. Would you write something for me? He asked. Of course. Not a decree. Just a line. Sadr al-Mulk readied his tablet. Abbas closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, he said softly, A rug is the memory of fingers. The scribe wrote. He paused, then looked up. Shall I mark the author? Abbas smiled faintly. No, he said. Let it belong to the weavers. A breeze rose then, stirring the edge of the carpet and lifting the smell of jasmine and drying wool. The Shah stood slowly, knees creaking. He handed the skeins of thread to the scribe. Give these to Mahan, he said. Tell her the king requests something small, something quiet. The scribe bowed again, gathered the threads, and departed. Abbas lingered 1 moment longer in the garden. A servant passed behind him, silently laying down a tray of dates and rosewater. Another rolled the edge of the rug to protect it from the dew that would come later. But Abbas did not move toward the palace yet. He looked out beyond the garden wall, past the tiled dome of the mosque, past the arched bazaar rooftops, toward the distant shimmer of the Zayander River, where women knelt to rinse wool in the morning sun, and threads floated like reeds in their fingers. He imagined them there, quiet, bent over skeins, their hands wet, their eyes steady. He imagined them knotting prayers into pattern, memory into border, grief into symmetry. He breathed in once more, and returned inside. It was afternoon in Isfahan. The sun hovered high but forgiving, softened by the pale, milky light of early autumn. The city moved slowly, never rushed, never idle. Somewhere beyond the palace, the copper basin was being scrubbed near the riverbank, its hollow ring echoing faintly over the tiled roofs. The wind carried the scent of bread from the communal ovens, mingled with pomegranate husks left to dry on woven mats beside the dice stalls. In Nakshi Jahan Square, horses drank from the trough near the fountain, their reins tied loosely to stone posts carved with lotus petals. Merchants arranged fine pottery on folded cloths. A boy balanced a tray of rosewater sherbet above his head. Pigeons turned lazy arcs overhead, scattering and settling in rhythm with the wind. The square was vast, open, symmetrical breathing. Abbas had designed it that way. Not alone, of course. Men of math, geometry, and piety had drawn the lines. But the vision, what it should feel like to walk through such a space, what it should mean to see a dome from one angle and a bazaar from another, that was his. The space moved, gently, like a story. That afternoon, Abbas walked the square not as a king among subjects, but as a quiet observer in his own creation. His guards followed at a distance, too trained to speak, their sandals nearly soundless on the polished stone paths. He wore a plain wool cloak, bleached bone white from years of sun. His sash was narrow. His boots, soft leather, left little trace on the dust. He passed between stalls with no particular purpose. A spice seller offered a pinch of dried lime. A weaver's apprentice lifted a length of silk, dyed the color of eggplant. Abbas nodded, sometimes, but spoke little. He stopped near a carpet merchant's tent, modest, with rolled rugs stacked like scrolls, one unfurled in the front, its red field just beginning to fade with sun. He studied it. The merchant, sensing curiosity, approached. He bowed deeply, not recognizing the king, only the quiet stillness of the man's gaze. A fine piece, the merchant offered. Isfahan work, not count high. The border pattern is my own design. Abbas tilted his head slightly. Not Tabrizi. No, sire. Tabriz is too symmetrical, too polite. This one breathes. The king almost smiled. The carpet was good. Not masterwork, but good. The vines curved slightly asymmetrical on the left. A deliberate imperfection, perhaps. Or the weaver's mood that day. Either way, it had life. May I? Abbas asked. Of course, my lord. He knelt, not stiffly, but with the familiarity of someone who had done it many times. He brushed the pile with the flat of his hand, feeling the direction of the weave. The wool was soft, the knots tight. How long? He asked, still facing the rug. 7 months, sire. 3 women worked it, 2 sisters and a cousin. Abbas nodded. He rose again and adjusted his sash. He did not buy the carpet. He only said, "May your designs continue to breathe." Then he turned and walked on. The square in its fullness lay before him like a great open rug. The turquoise dome of the Shah Mosque gleamed at its southern edge, rising like a distant planet. The bazaar snaked away through the arcade, its darkness cool, its tiled ceiling patterned like the inside of a fig. He stepped inside. Here, the world narrowed. The air thickened with spice, with wool, with sweat. The cries of merchants softened into murmurs. Copper bowls clinked. Fabric rustled under fingers. Somewhere, water dripped steadily into a clay jar. He passed a perfumer's stall where a child crushed dried rose petals with a marble pestle. He passed an old man twisting candle wicks between his knees. He passed a woman balancing a basket of dyed thread, its ends trailing like smoke. He stopped at a spice merchant's shop, not for the wares, but for the smell. Saffron, turmeric, cumin. dried lemon and sumac, the sweetness of dried fenugreek. He remembered his mother's cooking. He remembered the white ceramic pot she used for saffron rice, how the lid always clicked when she lifted it. She had died before Isfahan became a capital, before the great dome was tiled, before the streets turned smooth under royal orders. Now the city was an empire in miniature, a theater of discipline and grace, stitched together with canals, mosques, schools, and baths. Merchants walked in orderly rows. Tradespeople knew their place. Pilgrims marveled. Foreigners wrote letters. There were even Europeans now, Jesuits in the Armenian quarter, whispering Latin in the shade, drawing maps. Abbas did not fear them. Not yet. He left a bazaar by the northern gate, where the sun had shifted lower, casting long shadows across the street. He moved through a quiet alley where students read aloud in a school courtyard, their voices soft and steady. When he reached the edge of the river, he paused. The Zayanda still flowed, though slower now in the late season. The bridge ahead, Soespol, was wide and elegant, its 33 arches curving over the water like knotted thread. He had ordered it built years ago, after returning from a failed expedition, something beautiful to mark a season of humility. He walked across it slowly. Halfway, he stopped to watch the women below. They were washing wool, as they did every week, standing knee-deep in the shallows, lifting skeins of wet fiber and slapping them against stone. The sound was steady, rhythmic. Some of the women sang. Others did not. Their sleeves were rolled, their scarves tied back. Their hands moved with the same deliberation he had seen in the palace garden. He watched without speaking. They did not look up. To them, he was only a man in a wool cloak, perhaps a merchant, perhaps a teacher, perhaps no one of note. And Abbas, standing in the golden light with his boots damp from river spray, allowed the thought to settle gently in his mind that this city, this elegant empire, dressed in tile and silk, stood not on armies, but on hands like those, hands that twisted and tied, washed and cut, combed and dyed, hands that never signed edicts, but shaped the world beneath them. He stood there until the sun dipped below the trees. Then he crossed the rest of the bridge, turned quietly toward the palace, and disappeared into the lengthening shadow of the square. The audience chamber was unusually quiet that morning, not empty. Abbas never received envoys alone, but quiet in a way that signaled importance. The scribes were present, seated against the far wall with ink-stained fingers. The guards stood motionless in their corners. 2 translators lingered near the pillar, their eyes low, their posture careful. Sunlight filtered through the mashrabiyah lattice, casting shadow patterns that moved like netting across the tiled floor. And in the center, on a carpet newly unrolled, sat the ambassador from Venice. He was a man of middle years, narrow-shouldered, his beard carefully trimmed. His robes were dark and embroidered with fine gold thread that shimmered when he shifted. His Persian was formal but serviceable. When he bowed, it was low. Not quite enough, but almost. Abbas sat at ease, though every angle of his body was precise. His robe was deep green, his turban white and modest. He wore no visible jewels. His expression was unreadable. Between them, in the center of the room, lay the carpet. It was the true guest. Unfurled at dawn by 2 court artisans, swept clean with a soft brush and sprinkled with rosewater mist. The rug had been laid with ceremony, not just as a seat, but as a message. The envoy had brought gifts, Venetian glass, coral beads, a small lacquered icon. But Abbas had replied, not with objects, but with texture. The carpet was new, not count high, dyed in natural pigments only, madder, indigo, walnut husk, and saffron. No synthetic brilliance. The center medallion formed the shape of a pomegranate, split open, detailed with fine seeds, and around the border, delicate curves mirrored cypress branches and almond blossoms. Its colors were balanced, but one stood out, a gray-blue shade, rare, known to weavers as ashkabi, the color of tears. The ambassador did not know this. He sat straight, his boots removed, his posture trained by court tradition. He thanked the Shah for his hospitality and spoke of mutual benefit, trade along the Caspian, naval intelligence, the Portuguese threat. Eastern silk. Abbas nodded occasionally. He asked few questions. His answers were brief. The ambassador tried again. He praised the city, the domes, the symmetry, the silence of the gardens. He quoted a Latin poet. He complimented the mosque's calligraphy. At last, Abbas looked up. "And what did you think of the carpet beneath your feet?" The room paused. The envoy glanced down. He hesitated. "It is very fine," he said. "Soft, harmonious." Abbas tilted his head slightly. "Harmonious," he repeated. "Yes." He did not speak again for a moment. A faint breeze stirred the incense smoke. Somewhere outside, a horse whinnied and was quiet again. The Shah rose. The gesture was not abrupt, but deliberate. He stepped down from the dais and walked to the edge of the carpet. Slowly, he crouched, one knee on the tile, his hand resting lightly against the rug's corner. "This is Kashani work," he said, not facing the envoy. "The weaver began it in the month of Tyr, under a humid sky. She used only wool from spring shearing, softer, less brittle. Her husband had died a month earlier, and her daughter was ill. She worked by lamplight, after prayers, after cooking, after grief." He brushed a finger across the weave. "You see the knotwork near the medallion? It tightens. Not from error, from sorrow." He stood again. "I asked for that rug to be laid here today, so you might understand something." The envoy swallowed, unsure if a response was expected. Abbas continued, quietly, "When I send carpets to courts like yours, it is not ornament. It is speech, not to decorate your halls, but to remind you of hands like hers." The ambassador offered a small nod. It was respectful, if uncertain. Abbas did not press further. He returned to his seat. The conversation drifted elsewhere. Tariffs, grain, a proposed Jesuit school in New Julfa. The scribes wrote. The translators murmured. But the carpet said nothing. It only waited beneath them. That evening, after the envoy had gone, the room was empty once more. The Shah remained. The carpet had been rolled away, returned to its place in a cedar-lined vault beneath the palace. But its absence lingered, a hollow where color once lay. Abbas walked slowly through the garden arcade, his hand trailing along the blue-tiled wall. His steps were soft, his turban loose, his eyes darker than usual. He did not speak to the servant who followed, nor to the gardener sweeping fallen leaves into a corner. Instead, he paused beneath the jasmine trellis and sat cross-legged on the ground, in the dust. He remembered something small, his first foreign gift, decades ago. A wool rug from Anatolia, coarse but patterned with unfamiliar birds. He had been 14. His father had dismissed it. Abbas had studied it for weeks, fascinated. He'd imagined the birds were messengers, each flying toward the same center, each carrying a secret no one had yet read. Now, he wondered if anyone read the messages he sent, or if they merely walked on them, soft-footed. Speaking of trade, he plucked a jasmine petal from the path and held it up to the fading light. White, but with a blush of yellow at the base. Fragile, like thread, the city rustled in the distance. A woman's laughter echoed from a terrace. A copper bowl clanged. The sound of life, full and unnoticed. Abbas remained still. He had given carpets to emperors, princes, bishops, and bankers. They had hung them in halls, folded them in chests, sold them, prayed on them. Some were now lost to fire. Some faded. Some locked behind glass, their messages no longer legible. But some, he hoped, were still walked upon, still catching crumbs and tears, still holding the memory of hands. He stood, at last, brushing dust from his robe, and walked back into the palace, under a sky the color of old indigo, carrying nothing, but listening to the thread of the day still weaving itself behind him. By the time the fig leaves turned yellow in the courtyards of Isfahan, the Shah no longer visited the square. He watched it sometimes, from behind the carved wooden screen of his private chamber. The Nakshi Jahan still shimmered with life, horses, merchants, pilgrims, calligraphers, perfumers, and the daily hush that came at sunset. But Abbas, who had once pasted stones at dawn and dictated orders over saffron tea, now observed more than he walked. He had grown older, though not suddenly. The body softens quietly, like wool left too long and die. His knees ached in the mornings. His hands, once so precise in gesture, had taken to trembling slightly when he drank. His voice remained clear, but rarely raised. Most of his court had grown used to this quieter Abbas. Others, ambitious, younger, waited. The palace remained orderly, its mosaics bright, its fountains cleaned. But in the back gardens, where he spent his hours now, the fig trees were beginning to lose their fruit without being picked. One afternoon, he asked to be brought to the oldest rug in the collection. He didn't say why. The steward only nodded, bowed, and returned an hour later with a tightly rolled bundle wrapped in cloth. Abbas had it unrolled in the west-facing hall, an old wing, seldom used, with high windows and narrow niches, once meant for books and perfume vessels. The rug was faded now. The red had gone to rosewood. The blue had dimmed like aged sky. But the pattern remained, a border of almond blossoms, and in the center, an endless knot. He sat beside it, not on a throne, but on a low cushion, and rested his hand against the worn edge. He remembered it well. This was not just any carpet. It had been woven for his father, not for a coronation or celebration, but as a gift from a provincial governor, intended to flatter, to win favor. Abbas had seen it first when he was 12. Hiding behind a pillar during court, he had watched his father step over it without pause, without noticing the hours knotted into its frame. Later, Abbas had traced the border with his own fingers, trying to memorize the loops. Now, the same rug sat beneath his hand again, softened by decades. He leaned forward, not for prayer, but for nearness. There were no advisors here, no poets, no courtiers with new ink and new ambition. Only the rustling of birds in the rafters and the occasional whisper of wind through the lattice windows. He thought, then, not of campaigns or councils or treaties, but of knots, of how each one was meant to vanish. A good rug showed no knot to the eye, only surface, only form. But beneath that beauty was tension, tiny, precise, uncounted, like decisions, like years. He smiled faintly. This was the irony of power, to be remembered not for one's hands, but for the illusion they held. The carpet at his feet was known in the record books only by size and origin. Cashin, year of the goat, gift from Governor Barrow. No one had noted the weaver. No one had written of the girl who spun the thread, or the man who dyed it, or the winter month when the sheep were shorn. And yet, he thought, perhaps that was the better fate, to be forgotten, but walked upon, to be useful, not named. A servant entered softly, announcing that the evening meal was ready. Abbas did not rise. He only waved his hand gently, asking for it to be brought here. A tray was laid before him, lentil soup, flatbread, yogurt with dill, and a small bowl of pomegranate seeds. He ate slowly alone. There had been a time when every meal had been surrounded by scribes, relatives, and whispers of poetry. Now the silence suited him. The words had not stopped. Only the need for them had. He recalled a night, years ago, when a visiting poet from Shiraz had asked him whether he considered himself more architect or king. Abbas had answered, "Neither. I am the carpet under both." The poet had smiled, but hadn't understood. Now perhaps Abbas did. Not metaphorically, but truly. His life had been a warp stretched across time, pulled by tension, held in place by repetition. And over that tension, design had been laid. Beautiful, yes, but also functional. Durable, underfoot. That had been the goal. Not to dazzle, but to hold. He finished his meal and drank his tea. The tray was cleared. He gestured for the rug, to remain unrolled. That night, he slept beside it. Not on a bed, not in ceremony, but curled near its edge like a child beside a story. The room was quiet. No fire burned. The moonlight fell across the floor in pale squares. And the rug, beneath the sleeping king, remembered. In the months that followed, Abbas left the palace less and less. His orders came softly, through narrow corridors and trusted voices. He approved repairs to the bathhouses, requested fresh tiles for the Julfa Bridge, and inquired, now and then, after the Dyers' Guild. One day, He asked a question that surprised his council. How many carpets have we sent abroad? The scribes conferred. They returned with numbers. Dozens to the Ottomans, some to the Deccan, several to Italy and Spain, a few to Poland. Abbas nodded. And how many came back? There was a pause. None, sire. He smiled again. That is how I know they were well made. That night, he asked to see the court's apprentice weavers. A group of girls, some as young as 10, were brought to the palace. They stood nervously in the garden, hands clasped, their eyes darting between the guards and the trees. Abbas met them in his robe and sandals. He asked no questions. He gave no orders. He only said, "When you weave, don't rush the borders. That is where memory hides." Then he returned to his chamber slowly, with a hand pressed lightly to the wall. By the end of his reign, the city still stood. Isfahan, his design, breathed on, its streets aligned to the sun, its domes bluer than the river sky, its courtyards filled with thread, dye, laughter, and silence. Shah Abbas had died not in battle, not in ceremony, but in his own bed, surrounded by soft things. A shawl, a bowl of dyed skeins, a rug that once belonged to no one, and a sky, fading slowly, like wool in the wash. There's a carpet in an old prayer hall in Yazd. It lies beneath the feet of no one now. The door to the hall remains locked most days, its hinges rusted, the brass handle warm from centuries of desert sun. But sometimes, when the caretaker has finished his tea, and the wind shifts just enough to cool the stone corridor, he will push open the door and let the light in. It falls gently, always in the same pattern, filtered through high lattice windows, catching the worn pile of the rug like the sheen on weathered silk. The carpet does not shine anymore. Its red has dimmed to rust. Its indigo is closer to dusk than sky. But the shape of it remains, a long rectangle, bordered in cypress and carnation, and in the center an arch. Not a grand arch, not symmetrical, tilted slightly, just slightly to the left. It is the kind of flaw you only notice if you know how to see it, the kind of mistake no master weaver would allow. And yet, no one has unknotted it. No one has tried to correct the thread. The locals call it sajdui kai, the tilted prostration. They say the woman who wove it never finished her final prayer. Others say it was meant to reflect a particular angle of a vanished Qibla. But most say nothing at all. They walk past the locked room with quiet familiarity, the way you pass a place where something once happened, long ago, to someone you've never met, but somehow remember. The rug's origins are not written anywhere. Its back has no inked signature, no tag of date or workshop, only knots. Tight, steady, unnamed. The old dye still breathes if the light is warm enough. Madder in the blossoms, walnut in the vines, indigo in the shadows behind the arch. A single thread of pomegranate red runs through the border, stopping midway down one side, then disappearing. There are no records to explain that thread. There are no stories that hold. Only the silence of the rug itself, and the way it seems to glance away, just a little, as if modesty or memory turned its gaze. In a village near Kashan, where the fields bloom briefly each spring in saffron and wild mustard, there's a house with a shuttered window. The window has no glass, only a wooden lattice, painted green long ago, now chipped to reveal the soft gray beneath. Behind that window, folded in a chest beneath old linens, is a half-finished carpet. It has not been touched in 3 generations. No one in the house remembers the pattern. The youngest daughter once traced it with her finger and said it looked like waves, or maybe hair. Her grandmother told her not to say such things. The next day, the girl found the chest closed, and the window shutter drawn tight. The carpet is made of wool dyed in pale greens and clay browns, unusual colors for a region so rich in red and gold. Its knots are fine, but not consistent. Some pull too tightly, others hang loose. There are places where the wool has been knotted over itself 3 or 4 times, as if correcting a hesitation. In one corner, beneath the fringe, the initials Y are stitched in blue thread. No one in the house bears that name. No one knows whose hands began the rug. But on rainy nights, when the clay floor dampens and the smell of dust returns, the old woman of the house will sometimes bring out the chest, lift the lid just enough to breathe the wool, and murmur a phrase none of the children understand. Not a prayer, not quite, more like a memory waiting to be spoken again. In Isfahan's oldest dye house, now a museum that smells of vinegar and warm brick, there's a row of clay vats still marked with the fingerprints of long-vanished workers. Near the back wall, a display case holds tools, combs of bone, spindles made from fig wood, measuring cords stained with rose oil. Among them lies a thin, folded parchment, the kind once used to pass instructions between loom masters and dye merchants. The writing has faded almost entirely, but pressed into the corner of the page is a diagram, not a sketch of a pattern, nor a technical design, just a row of knots. 7, then a space, then 9, then one alone, drawn with a heavier hand. Below it, in fine script, the phrase, "For a silence." No one knows who wrote it. The label beneath simply says, "Weaving Note, 17th century." The curators have tried to trace its origin. No dye house logs mention it. No masterwork references match its sequence. But the paper has been kept, sealed behind glass, beside tools worn smooth from use. And visitors, when they pause there, often lean in. They read the note. They look at the knots. And for a moment, they forget what they were looking for. There are patterns, the weavers say, that only come in winter, not because they are drawn that way, but because the hands remember better when cold, when breath clouds the loom and fingers move slower. These rugs tend to be tighter, heavier. Their borders are often uneven, their symmetry slightly blurred, and within them, sometimes, are symbols not found in any talum. A vine that curls too soon, a rose that never fully opens, a shadow woven in a single thread of undyed wool. Weavers do not name these things. They do not discuss them, not out of secrecy, but out of habit. These are the quiet marks left by hunger, by lost sleep, by stories whispered behind cloth. They are not errors, not artistry, just echoes, threaded through time like breath through lattice. In some homes, especially near calm, rugs were woven with deliberate flaws, not decorative, not symbolic, but placed one knot upside down, a mistake that no one could see. These were called Cheshemikota, the eye of God, a mark of humility, so the weaver would not forget their place, so the beauty would not become arrogance, so the perfection would not invite envy. Some believe these knots carry blessing, others believe they hide sorrow. Most forget where they are once the rug is sold, but sometimes a buyer will pause mid-prayer and feel something strange beneath their fingertips, and wonder, just briefly, if the rug is watching back. At the edge of an orchard, where mulberries fall too fast for the birds to eat, a woman once sat with a child in her lap and whispered the names of each color in the carpet they had just finished. She did not use the names taught by merchants. She used her own. "This one is moon water," she said, touching the pale gray. "This one is broken almond. This one is the dream I forgot to write down." The child repeated each one, softly, tracing the pattern with her thumb. When the buyer came the next day and asked the child the name of the rug, she looked up and answered plainly, "This is the sound of breath in the cold." The man laughed and called it tree and star motif, number 4, but the child remembered the other name. And though the rug was rolled and taken far, far away, she carried that name inside her, unspoken, unneeded, but living. Even now, her hands remember how it felt to say it. Some carpets last centuries, others unravel. The sun fades them. The damp wears their borders. Mice chew their corners. Heels grind away their memory. But in some places, in quiet rooms, in still alleys, behind tea shops and under painted ceilings, there remain traces. A knot turned left when all others bent right. A thread that ends in a color not found anywhere else. A signature sewn backward. A silence that cannot be read. Not signs. Not puzzles. Just the shape of something half forgotten, waiting to be walked on again. Waiting to be noticed by someone who won't ask questions. Only listen. There's a season for weaving. Not written in any almanac, not marked on the lunar calendars pinned near the bread ovens, but remembered in the body. A season that arrives when the wind first turns inland, when the light spills through the lattice in a longer, sleepier slant, and when the dye pots steam more gently in the morning than they did the month before. The weavers know this. They know it in their wrists, in the way their fingers flex before dawn, in the silence that settles between tea and thread. It is not a sudden season. It doesn't announce itself with festival or frost. It arrives the way old scents return, faint, then familiar, then gone again. This is when the deeper rugs are begun, not the ones for sale in the square, not the festival pieces, but the quiet ones, the long looms, the rugs meant for prayer or dowry or remembrance. Sometimes they are planned, sometimes they aren't. Sometimes a woman will rise before the stove is lit and look at her wall and know, without knowing why, that a new pattern must begin. A hush follows her then, a hush that might last for weeks. There's a kind of wool they use in this season, not sheared from spring lambs, not scoured for show, but the soft underwool from older sheep, combed gently with figwood teeth. It smells faintly of clay and ash, and when dyed, it holds color like breath on cold glass, delicate, but real. The dye, too, changes. The indigo turns duskier. The madder root, soaked longer, leans toward rust. Some women, when no one is looking, crush dried rose hips into the vat, not for brightness, but for memory. They don't explain this. They don't speak it. It is the same with the way they knot. Slower, tighter, and sometimes with a small pause before the center begins. A breath, perhaps, or a prayer, or something else. A hesitation passed down not through word, but rhythm. Grandmothers used to call it the pivot stitch, though no one knows if that was ever its name. A knot placed just before the center medallion, sometimes sideways, sometimes doubled. Not a flaw, not visible, but different, distinct in the hand. Some say it was to mark the day of beginning. Others say it honored someone past, but most never mention it at all. Only the loom knows. In a village near Ardestin, an old woman once wove the same rug every winter for 10 years. Each one began the same, a field of soft gray with a border of 7 rings. The central shape shifted slightly from year to year, sometimes a vase, sometimes a flame, once a leaf, but the border never changed. 7 rings, all uneven. No sketches survived, no instructions, but the loom, still stored in her son's attic, bears faint grooves in the frame, marks from her hand, just below the left beam, a small scratch shaped like a teardrop. When asked about it, the son shrugs. She never sold them, gave some away, buried one. When asked what the pattern meant, he only says, she didn't name it. Weaving is not always communal. There are looms that face the wall, hidden ones, kept in back rooms or storage halls, covered with cloth when visitors come, not from shame, but from something quieter, a need to protect or preserve. One such loom was found in the ruins of a collapsed dye house near Borgard. The house itself had burned long ago, its roof fallen in, the tiles now scattered like broken plates across the ground. But in a side room, still partly intact, archaeologists found a loom, upright, scorched but untouched. The rug was still on it, only half woven. The pattern was strange, geometric but soft-edged, a lattice of diamonds with thread colors that did not match local tradition. Pale greens, blue-gray, a kind of clay pink. But the mystery was not the design, it was the sound. When the wind blew just right through the broken roof, the loose threads hummed. Not a melody, not a note, just a soft vibration, like someone speaking a word just below hearing. The loom was taken to a museum. The threads were preserved, but the sound has never been recorded. They say it only happened there, only once, only when no one was listening. Some weavers stitched initials into the fringe, usually discreet, 1 or 2 letters, turned sideways, sometimes in a contrasting thread, sometimes hidden in the warp. But there were others who did not mark their names, but instead left single threads uncut, a tail of wool, tucked beneath the rug but never tied, a loose thread that no comb would catch, No merchant would notice. These threads were called Nafa's breaths. No one remembers who began the practice, but old rugs, found folded in disused prayer rooms or stored beneath other rugs in caravanseries, sometimes show them still. A single thread unanchored, the breath of the weaver left behind. There's a town near the edge of the Dashti Kavar Desert where carpets were woven only during certain moon phases. No records confirm this. Only the stories of dye merchants who remember their schedules, how they would delay delivery of walnut husks or dried saffron if the moon was wrong. Not because of light, because of feeling. The women there said the wool handled differently beneath certain moons, that the thread twisted easier, that the designs came clearer. They said the color remembered better when the night sky was quiet. When asked what quiet meant, they only smiled. There are motifs that appear in no Talim books, shapes that do not belong to tribe or city or family. They come once, maybe twice, in a single carpet, never again. A bird with a closed beak, a flower with one petal turned inward, a small door woven into the corner of a border, half open. Weavers do not explain them. They arrive the way dreams do, suddenly, vividly, and without source. Some are removed, others left. There's one rug in a shrine near Shiraz that bears a tiny woven key, no more than a dozen knots, hidden between a vine and a rose. It does not unlock anything. It does not match the design, but it is there, and no one removes it. The season passes, as quietly as it came. The cold light lifts, the wool thickens, the knots return to their quicker pace, and the looms take on louder patterns, festival reds, spring yellows, bright symmetry. But beneath some of them, if you lift the edge gently and look near the base, a knot will be tilted, a border will curve, a fringe will hide a thread, and the silence of that season, the one not recorded, not named, will still be there, waiting, not to be explained, only walked upon, only remembered by the hands that once tied it. There's a way to teach pattern that does not use words. It begins with a look, held for a breath longer than usual, then a nod, a shift of weight, the brush of fingers across the warp as if to say, now, here again. The learner watches, not the design, not the finished form, but the movement, the curl of the wrist, the pause between knots, the way the hand dips into the basket without searching, as if the color has already chosen itself. This is how many girls learn to weave, not through diagrams or chance, but through hours of quiet observation, sitting cross-legged on folded cloth, sweeping stray threads from the floor, holding the skein steady while the elder tied, waiting, watching. There's a rhythm to it, not marked in beats, but in breath. The teacher would work, and the girl would breathe with her, slowly, without effort, matching the pace of the loom until her body learned the shape of silence. And one day, when the teacher paused to drink or shift her seat, the girl would lean forward and tie one knot, just one, and the teacher, without speaking, would know. In an orchard town near Save, the grandmothers used to say that every girl had one pattern already inside her, not chosen, not learned, not taught, but waiting. It might be the turn of a vine, or the shape of a bird's wing, or the tilt of a flower no one else could draw quite the same. They believed the pattern would come when the fingers were ready, not before, and if it never came, that was fine too. Not all threads had to tell stories. Some were just meant to hold the rug together. A weaver named Soraya once worked in a house with 12 other women. She spoke rarely, and when she did, it was with her hands, turning the skein, brushing the fringe, tapping the loom bar when she needed space. Her rugs were never sold in the market. They were set aside, given to travelers, given to brides with no dowry, given to shrines. She only used 3 colors, smoke gray, bitter red, and a pale yellow like dried straw. She never signed her work, but in each of her carpets, somewhere near the base of the field, there was always a small unknotted space. No one asked why. No one filled it in. When Soraya died, they buried her with an unfinished border draped across her feet. The knot count stopped mid-stitch. No one resumed it. They folded the rug and placed it in the earth, like a letter never sent. In the winters, when the sun barely lifted above the rooftops, some weavers would light a small coal pot beside the loom, not for heat, not only, but to keep the air soft. The steam from the tea kettle would rise in a ribbon. The wool, held above it for just a moment, would loosen, and in that softness, the fingers moved slower. The knots landed with a hush. The sound of wool meeting wool was like paper being folded underwater. These were the quiet rugs, the ones made when visitors stayed away, when children napped, when no one asked what the pattern meant. They were often small, prayer-sized, lap-sized, but when laid out, they gave the impression of something much larger, not because of scale, but because of silence. Some women never used the same color twice. Others used only one. A woman in Varaman worked for 40 years and never touched indigo. She said it reminded her of winter nights too long. Her daughter, years later, wove a rug entirely in blue, claiming she dreamt of it often. No one questioned either. In the world of rugs, repetition was not always consistency. Sometimes it was resistance. Sometimes it was memory. The hands remember what the mind forgets. A girl might forget the number of rows in her mother's border, but her hands will tie the curve of it one morning without knowing why. She might forget the smell of the old dyer's shop, but her fingers will reach instinctively for the cochineal red when the day turns cloudy. These things are not taught. They are passed, in the way bread is shaped, in the way sleeves are rolled, in the way silence is kept when the pattern veers, and though the records kept by the guilds note length, width, origin, dye, and sale, they say nothing of the slow touch before the first knot, nothing of the sigh that accompanied the last. In one town, on the edge of a salt plain, every rug contained a star, not at the center, not always visible, sometimes tucked into a corner, sometimes shaped from negative space, sometimes only suggested by the placement of pale knots in a darker field. When asked why, the weavers shrugged. The star, they said, was for orientation, so you wouldn't forget which way was up. There is a pattern that appears only once in the surviving rugs of the Safavid period, a field of swirling lines, like wind through wheat. It has no center, no border. It ends without symmetry. The rug is in a private collection now, in a room rarely opened. A scholar once visited and studied it by candlelight. When she was asked what she saw, she said only, "It feels like remembering something I never knew." The collector smiled. That was the only answer he ever kept. Some patterns cannot be woven twice, not because they are forbidden, but because they cannot be recalled. A weaver from Tabriz once spoke of a rug she made after her sister died. She said the knots came like breath, one after another, without pause. She did not draw the design. She did not name it. When it was finished, she folded it and set it in the rafters. Years later, when her niece tried to copy it, the loom would not hold the thread. Not wrong, not broken, just unready. The rug still waits, untouched, uncopied, complete. The loom remembers, even when dismantled, even when its beams are stacked in the corner of a shed and its combs hang rusting from a nail. It carries the memory of tension. You can feel it if you press your palm to the wood. The faint give, the breath held there. No one talks about this, but the weavers know. They run their hands over the loom before they begin, not to clean it, but to greet it. What the hands remember is not always passed through family. Sometimes a neighbor shows you, sometimes a traveler, sometimes the dream of a hand you've never held. And the pattern comes, not with clarity, but like smoke returning to incense. The girl learns, and then forgets, and then remembers years later, in the curve of a corner she thought she'd invented. And so it continues, not explained, not recorded, not necessary, only moved gently from hand to hand, like a thread that doesn't pull, but wraps softly around the next. Waiting, in a quiet room behind a shuttered door, there's a rug that has never been named. It was woven long ago, no one is sure when, or by whom. The room belongs to a small mosque at the edge of a garden near Hamadan. The garden is mostly stone now, the apricot trees dry, their roots creeping beneath the tiled wall. A caretaker sweeps the leaves, fills the water basin for birds, and oils the hinges of the prayer hall twice a year. The room remains mostly empty. The prayer rugs are folded. The windows are kept closed against dust. But the unnamed rug still lies flat, unrolled in the center of the floor, pressed gently by time. It is pale, paler than age alone might cause. The colors feel as though they were always fading, even at their first knot. A soft bone-white field, a wash of yellow-gray at the corners, traces of indigo at the border, so faint they could be mistaken for shadow. The pattern, if it ever had one, is nearly lost. And yet people pause when they see it, not for beauty, not for intricacy, but for something quieter, something like silence woven into form. Visitors often find themselves stepping around the rug, even if the floor is otherwise bare, as if afraid to interrupt something, as if the rug is still listening. A woman once tried to photograph it long ago, with a lacquered box camera and silver plates. The image came back empty, just the impression of light on tile. She tried again, the same. When she left, she said only, "It's not that it's invisible. It just doesn't want to be remembered that way." There's a line in a 17th century dyer's notebook, written in the margin beside a recipe for walnut husk ink. Some colors are only seen once. No explanation, no arrow pointing to a specific passage, just those 6 words, written in a fainter hand, with a smudge at the edge. Some scholars believe it referred to unstable dyes, those prone to fading. Others think it was poetic nonsense. But few, quietly, keep a list of carpets they've seen only once. A rug glimpsed in a merchant's courtyard, then gone by morning. A piece unrolled at a marriage feast, never shown again. A folded prayer mat carried by a widow who sat alone near the mirror. The list grows slowly, passed between archivists like an inside joke no one can fully explain. They do not pursue the rugs. They only write them down, and sometimes, before sleep, they remember the colors, real or imagined, and wonder what it means to be seen once and never again. In some villages, the old women say that rugs do not disappear. They retreat, fold into themselves, return to the thread. A rug that vanishes from a household is not lost, they say. It has simply remembered something, a pattern from another time, a knot it forgot to finish. It goes back to find it. On the southern edge of Isfahan, in a storeroom beneath an abandoned guild house, there is a loom still standing. Its beams are cracked, its comb rusted. No thread stretches across its face, but on the back wall, drawn in chalk, faint and half erased, is a sequence of shapes. Circles, not precise, not aligned. Some are open, some are filled in. There are no annotations, no numbers, no arrows. But at the bottom corner, drawn smaller than the rest, is a single square, just wide enough to hold a fingertip. And inside it, a tiny spiral. The chalk fades more each year. No one dares brush it clean. In a mountain village now nearly empty, a traveler once found a rug draped across the back of a door. The house had no roof, no furniture, just wind and shadow and the sweet, dry smell of pine bark. The rug was tattered, its center torn, but its fringe was intact, long, soft, and twisted with bright thread. Each tassel a different color. None of them matched. He sat for a long time beside the door, watching the fringe move in the wind. He thought of writing it down, but the only word that came to him was breathing, so he let it go and walked away. A child once asked her grandmother, "Where do the patterns come from?" The old woman laughed softly and pressed her hand to the girl's chest. "From here," she said, but sideways. The child didn't understand. She thought patterns came from books. Years later, after her grandmother's death, she began a rug she had never planned. It formed beneath her fingers, without decision. A long, slow curve, filled with lines like eyelids, like hills, like sighs. She didn't name the pattern. She only called it hers. And tied a single thread of saffron wool at the corner. Not to mark it, just to thank it. Some say a rug remembers the house it came from. If you kneel on it, you might feel the slope of the old floor beneath. If you sleep on it, you might dream of rooms you've never seen. A tall stove in the corner, a wooden spoon with a worn handle, a bowl of pickled walnuts beside a window. None of this is certain, none of it verified, But once, a merchant carried a rug to Shiraz, and as he laid it out for a buyer, he paused. The pattern was unfamiliar, not the one he'd purchased. He stared for a long time, then rolled it again, and carried it back. In the ruins of an old caravansary, cracked open by time and tree roots, the only thing left intact was the flooring of one room. A rug had once covered it. You could tell by the stain. The pattern was long gone, but the shape remained. A faint outline in dust. Insects had eaten the pile. Rain had washed away the dye. But something remained. Not design, not thread, just a memory of symmetry. The shape of intention. A space where beauty once rested. A silence that shaped the air. The pattern always fades. Even the strongest dye will yield to sun. Even the tightest knot will wear. But the hand remembers. Not in words, not in history, but in motion, in rhythm, in the way a mother's voice changes when she hands a daughter the comb, in the way fingers learn to feel tension, in the pause before beginning, in the hush at the end. And so the mystery remains, not hidden, not secret, just quiet, folded in a chest, tucked beneath prayer, echoed in the way light falls on an old room, not meant to be solved, only seen, only walked on, only remembered softly, like breath caught in wool, like dust settling again. At the northern edge of Isfahan, behind high plastered walls the color of almond milk, sits a house built not to be seen from the street. The gates are tall but plain, the brick quiet, the courtyard large and bare. No tile, no fountain, just silence, broken only by the slow rattle of wind against the poplar leaves and the faint creak of a painted wooden door opening inward. It is not a palace, not officially, but it was built for a man who spoke to the Shah with his sandals still on. Inside, the floors are tiled in deep blue and faded cream. Their patterns reflect in long strips of light that slip through the carved window grills. Everything here is soft. Soft edges, soft colors, soft voices. Even the stairs curve in a slow, obedient arc, as if afraid to surprise anyone. The master of the house does not rise early, not because he is lazy, no one would dare say so, but because the morning, in his view, is not meant to be faced. It is meant to be softened, stretched like silk pulled taut across a frame. He wakes when the air has warmed just enough for the breeze to feel ornamental. This morning, as most mornings, he wakes alone. The sheet is fine cotton, woven in yazd, bleached in the courtyard for 6 days, until it glowed like bone. The pillow smells faintly of saffron and bay leaf. Beneath his feet, as he sits up, the rug is soft. Not new, not ancient. Its fringe has been combed by hand, and its pattern is a mirror image of itself, so perfect it feels a little false, like someone smiling too long. A servant enters, not young, not hurried. She places a tray at the edge of the platform, a bowl of thick yogurt dusted with rose petal, a plate of walnuts, a soft square of bread, still warm. She does not speak. He eats with long pauses, not from reverence or thoughtfulness, but because he can. There's no reason to rush. The courtyard will wait. The petitions will wait. The world outside the walls turns just the same, whether he lifts a spoon now or in a moment. The tea arrives, not in a glass, but in a small porcelain bowl shaped like an open pomegranate. It is steeped with dried lemon and crushed thyme. A curl of steam rises like a sigh and disappears before reaching his face. He drinks it in silence. The first words of the day are spoken after the 3rd hour of sun. A steward, his robe pressed without crease, his voice folded into softness, recites a list of guests expected for the noon meal. A calligrapher from Kazvin, a minor ambassador from the Deccan, a widow whose late husband donated 6 camels worth of saffron to the state. The master nods once. He touches the corner of a linen cloth folded on the divan. It is embroidered with blue thread, each corner bearing a different flower: jasmine, tulip, marigold, narcissus. No one knows why. He does not explain. The house is large but sparsely occupied. There are rooms no one enters, doors that stay closed for months, even years, courtyards that are swept but never sat in, cushions aired out for seasons that never come. Space here is not a function. It is a form of power, to have a hallway that leads nowhere, a staircase that rises only to an alcove with a single window, a wall tiled in mirrored glass when no one is meant to look too closely. Even the air feels choreographed. The scent of sandalwood lingers in the guest corridor. Cardamom hangs in the stairwell. The drawing room is perfumed with quince, not fresh, but simmered into jam in the kitchen hearth and set out in bowls shaped like folded leaves. These are not coincidences. These are arrangements, not for comfort, but for control. At midday, the guests arrive. Their shoes are removed at the entrance, collected on a tray lined with velvet. Their voices soften. Their bodies adjust to the rhythm of the house. Conversations slow, pause, reroute themselves toward acceptable subjects. The restoration of the shrine dome, the import of Chinese porcelain, the colors in this year's spring rugs. No one mentions war. No one asks what happened to the silversmith who stopped attending these meals. In the center of the dining hall, beneath a dome that echoes only when you want it to, the carpet is laid. It is a silk round weave with a red medallion center. The border is simple. The guests do not comment on it. That would be rude, but their glances are precise. One guest notes the angle of the prayer niche. Another notices the lack of the weaver's mark. The carpet was made for someone specific, but no one asks whom. The food arrives in small bowls, not plates. Apricots simmered in cinnamon, rice with saffron and slivers of almond, lamb roasted and torn by hand, its bones cracked with clean precision. There are no loud sounds. The spoons are made of horn. The laughter is polite. Conversation turns to a new poet in Shiraz. A verse is recited, not from memory, but from a folded note produced discreetly from a sleeve. The master smiles faintly. He has already heard it. Twice. A servant, younger than the others, spills a few drops of syrup onto the corner of the rug. She does not speak. She does not apologize. She kneels to blot it with rose water and silk cloth. The guests pretend not to notice. The master watches without comment. Later, that corner of the rug will be lifted, aired, and replaced with another rug of similar size, identical pattern, but a slightly different sheen. No one will be told why. The first rug will be folded, stored, forgotten. After the meal, the guests drift toward the east veranda. The cushions there are deeper, the light softer. One guest leans back, sighs, and says something about the beauty of simplicity. The others nod. They are all surrounded by tile, silk, and perfectly aligned pomegranate trees, trimmed into symmetrical shadows. Simplicity, here, is a luxury that only the complex can afford. A musician arrives, not to perform, only to tune. His instrument is placed on a folded cloth. His fingers test the strings. The sound echoes once lightly, then fades. He will play later, perhaps, if asked. The room smells of cooled ash and quince jam. A peacock feather lies on the floor, beside a folded shawl. No one knows whose it is. No one moves to pick it up. The afternoon slows. The light begins to shift, and the master, who has said little, stands and excuses himself, not with a bow, but with a glance toward the far door, the one that leads to the garden where no guests are allowed. He walks slowly, silently. His feet press the silk rug without sound. He enters the garden, and the door closes. And behind him, the house continues, as it always has. Soft, precise, curated, like a pattern too perfect to remember. Behind the stone walls of the house, behind the domed vestibule and its tiled alcoves, there is a second world, the women's quarters. Not hidden exactly, simply not mentioned. The courtyard here is smaller than the main one, but more carefully arranged. Its trees are thinner, trimmed to hold their shape. A cypress, a quince, and 3 rose bushes kept low and polite. The water basin is round, shallow, and clear, not for washing, not for drinking, but for reflecting the sky, when the weather permits. The women of the house are not many. 2 wives, a cousin, a widow from the master's family, a daughter just of marrying age, and the servants, more numerous, more quiet. Their names are known only by those who use them. This morning, as most mornings, begins in silk, not the fabric alone, but the sound of it, the hush of sleeves being drawn back, the slip of a sash loosened, the whisper of a curtain pushed aside by fingers with henna fading at the tips. In the eastern veranda, the women sit in a half circle, not for prayer, for embroidery. A cushion is passed, a bowl of dried figs, a cup of sweetened water, scented faintly with cardamom. Voices are soft, not from shyness, but from habit. Volume is for the market, the courtyard, the square. Here, words are folded like linens. Amina, the younger wife, holds a strip of silk across her knees, its pattern outlined in fine charcoal. She is stitching the border of a tulip motif. Red thread for the petals, gold for the stem. It will be sewn into the edge of a wall hanging, meant to be gifted at her cousin's engagement. The cousin is 15. The match was arranged. The tulip has nothing to do with her. Amina knows this. Still, she chooses red. The elder wife, Miriam, is threading her needle with care that borders on ceremony. She has not stitched anything in years, but this morning, she has decided. No one asks why. A servant fans her slowly, with a palm leaf fan painted in green ink. The fan's edge is frayed. No one repairs it. It is meant to fray. Near the corner of the courtyard, a small rug lies unfolded in the shade. It is not the best rug in the house, not even the fifth best, but it is used for prayer. The fringe has been trimmed. A faint oil stain darkens one edge. The pattern is simple, a pointed arch in blue, framed by faded vines. It belonged once to the master's mother. Now it belongs to no one. The women take turns on it, not by schedule, but by mood. Sometimes they kneel for long minutes. Sometimes they only touch their forehead to the wool and rise again, saying nothing. Faith here is practiced like scent, worn lightly, felt closely, shared without asking. The daughter, Layla, sits apart today, on the bench near the fig tree, a book in her lap, unopened. It is a book of poetry, copied by hand by a scribe whose ink ran low. The letters leaned softly to the right, as if tired from travel. She has read the verses many times. Today she only holds a book. A bee hums near her shoulder and moves on. The fig leaves shimmer. A voice calls from the kitchen window. Bread is ready. None of them move yet. They will wait for the tray to be brought. Waiting is part of the rhythm. Waiting is what the quarters teach. When the bread arrives, it is warm and brushed with yogurt and salt. Amina takes one piece and tears it slowly. The elder wife eats without dipping. Layla does not eat. She watches the breeze and the branches and wonders, without urgency, where the day will go next. The sky is pale. The heat has not yet risen. Everything is still gently undecided. They speak of clothing, of the widow's cousin who wore dyed wool to a shrine and was politely scolded, of the seamstress whose eyesight is faded and now embroiders with guessed shapes, of a new delivery of fabric from the Julfa quarter, woven by Armenians, but sold in the name of silk. They speak of weddings, of a musician who played too slowly, of a guest who praised the calligraphy too loudly. They speak of nothing, everything, and then they fall quiet. It is not an awkward silence. It is a room being exhaled. After the bread is cleared, the rugs are lifted. Not all of them, just the two laid for comfort beneath the cushions. One is carried to the sun to be aired. The other is shaken in the corner by a servant who does not look up. As the dust lifts, sunlight catches in it briefly, like glitter and flour. The air smells of crushed cardamom, wool, and something faintly floral, like perfume forgotten on cloth. Later, they will bathe, not together, not with indulgence, but in slow ritual. The marble floor of the hammam will be warm. The stone bench will be lined with towels folded into the shape of fans. The elder wife will sit longest. The widow will scrub her own back. Layla will close her eyes and count how long the water runs before it warms. They will emerge wrapped in linen and silence. They will oil their hair with bitter almond and comb it straight, and then they will return to the courtyard, where the sun has tilted and the fig tree has dropped one fruit onto the rug. No one will eat it. No one will sweep it. It will be allowed to rest. In the late afternoon, a tailor arrives, not to measure, only to show. He unrolls a bolt of fabric dyed the color of dried saffron flowers. Too pale to be gold, too warm to be gray. He says it comes from the north, that it was soaked in vinegar and salt, that it holds its color even in shadow. The women murmur. They touch the fabric. They do not speak of price, only a feeling. Does it feel like winter? Does it feel like a gift? Does it feel like something worn when one does not wish to speak? The master has sent it as a gesture, perhaps a token for a celebration not yet planned, perhaps a quiet reminder that his presence still touches this part of the house. The women folded. It will be stored, named later, maybe used, maybe not. That evening, as the sun fades, a lantern is lit in the corner of the veranda. Its glass is green, trimmed in brass. The flame flickers. Its light is not enough to read by, not really, but it is beautiful, and that is reason enough. Amina returns to her embroidery. Miriam sets down her sewing untouched. Layla hums a line of verse from the book she didn't open, and the fig, having lost its fruit to the tile, drops a second, softer one beside it. No one moves to gather them. This is not neglect. It is a kind of attention, letting things fall, letting them be. The room's dim. A bowl is placed by the door, rose water and clove, for scenting the hands before sleep. The rug is turned down at the edge. The book is closed, even if never opened. The servant lights one more lantern in the hall, and the women retreat, slowly, into the rooms where the night has already arrived. Their voices fade. The silence settles like silk, and in the courtyard, the rug remains, holding the shape of the day. A day of stillness, of arrangement, of waiting without need. There is a hallway in the master's house that bends without reason. It begins near the courtyard, between the kitchen's tiled arch and the blue door that leads to the stables, and curves softly, pointlessly, before straightening again. No room opens onto it. No alcove interrupts its path. It exists for passage, not purpose. The servants call it the cool hallway, though it is no cooler than the others. It is used for moving things that are not to be seen. A shawl returned without remark. A guest departing early. A message no longer needed. This is the shape of the house. Smooth detours, graceful exits. Places to arrive without having entered. Rooms that hear footsteps, but never voices. The master believes it elegant. The steward finds it useful. The rug laid down its center is wool, tightly woven, the color of rice straw. No border, no medallion, no signature. It is not meant to be noticed, and that is what makes it valuable. Security, in this world, is not built of walls. It is built of rhythm. Doors that open at the right moment. Curtains that move only with permission. A silence that wraps each conversation before it spills. The guards are not loud men in armor. They are cousins, distant uncles, literate nephews. Their robes are pressed. Their hands are clean. They say little, but they remember everything. Each bowl served. Each time a guest glances too long at the pattern on the carpet. Each time a servant closes a door a second too soon. At the far edge of the estate, there is a small second gate. Not hidden, not grand. Just a wooden door and a mud brick wall, behind an apricot tree that no longer bears fruit. It is used by the gardener, and sometimes by others. No one names them. The gate creaks softly, and someone leaves a parcel wrapped in old fabric, a pot of quince jam, a sealed envelope, a small bag of saffron threads, sometimes a page of poetry folded and signed. None of it addressed, all of it understood. The steward collects the items. He does not report them. He places them on the master's desk. By morning, they are gone. In the drawing room, a clock ticks. It does not chime. Its hands are shaped like almond leaves. Its face is blank. Only the steward knows how to read it. Time in this house does not follow hours. It follows arrangements. Tea is poured when the mood permits. Letters are answered when the ink feels right. Baths are drawn when the air turns. The master receives guests at odd intervals, never the same day twice. Some weeks are full of talk. Others drift, still as rugs hung to dry. This is not forgetfulness. This is design. The musicians who play here wear soft shoes. They carry their instruments in plain cases. They enter through the servants' vestibule. They tune with their backs turned. Music begins only after the tea is served, never before. The pieces are short. No applause follows. The master closes his eyes during certain passages, not in feeling, but in decorum. The music is meant to soothe, not stir. When the last note fades, there is no bow, no farewell. The musician is already gone. There are nights when the lamps are lit, but no one visits. Plates are prepared, cushions arranged. The scent of rosewater fills the corridor. A silver bowl of cardamom is placed on a carved stand. Everything waits. No knock comes. The lamps are extinguished. No one speaks of it. The steward erases the names from the ledger. The house remembers, but never says so. One evening, package arrives. A box bound in twine, wrapped in cloth dyed the color of copper dust, is placed on the master's writing table. He opens it alone. Inside is a rug, small, barely larger than a doormat, not fine, not silk. The pattern is crude. 3 rows of crooked flowers, a border of interrupted lines, and in one corner, stitched backward in pale thread, a phrase, for when it matters less. He stares at it for a long time. No anger, no amusement, just stillness. He folds the rug, places it beneath the cushion on the prayer platform, and never mentions it. There's a way the elite practice caution that looks like ease. They smile more at quiet guests. They serve thicker tea when something must be remembered. They give generous gifts when they are uncertain who might be listening. The master once gifted an entire carpet to a visiting cousin's son for a poem he never recited. The cousin smiled. The boy bowed. The rug was heavy, expensive. Its pattern was symmetrical, forgettable. It said, "You matter. Don't ask why." In the women's quarters, similar habits take root. Jewelry is worn, then quietly passed on. Letters are written, then burned before sunrise. Perfume is applied, then covered with shawls. The daughter, Layla, once embroidered a tulip with 4 petals instead of 5. When asked, she said, "I'm astounded." The elder wife said nothing, but she set the finished cloth aside and placed a new hoop in Layla's lap. Same design, same thread. "This one," she said, "will not be mistaken." Layla nodded, but her fingers hesitated on the first stitch. Servants carry more than trays. They carry glances, tones, fragments of conversations never meant for them. They hear prayers whispered in wrong directions. They see pages turned too fast. They are not spies. They are part of the weave. Their loyalty is not in silence, but in rhythm. As long as the house continues, so do they. But should the pattern shift too sharply, they disappear. No accusation, just absence. A cushion missing from a prayer platform. A bowl returned to the wrong shelf. A door that closes too gently. Luxury, at its quietest, is not about possession. It is about the illusion of certainty. That tea will arrive hot. That rugs will cover the floor. That the garden will stay trimmed. The books will be dusted. The names will be remembered. But beneath the silk, there is always a thread out of place. A note not played. A step that lands too loud on tile. And once you notice it, you cannot forget. You begin to listen for it. And it never quite goes away. Tonight, the master walks the long hall. He carries no lamp. His robe is soft. His slippers leave no echo. At the end of the hall, a room waits. Inside, a small table holds an oil lamp unlit. Beside it, folded precisely, is the rug with the backward phrase. He sits on the floor, unfolds the rug, lights the lamp, and kneels, not for prayer, not for ritual, just to rest his forehead against the wool, and feel what has no name. By the time the master falls ill, nothing changes. The courtyards are still swept at dawn, the garden trimmed, the fountain wiped of dust. The silver bowls are polished until they forget their reflection, and the rugs are shaken as if guests might arrive. They do not, but the cushions are still arranged. That is what the house knows how to do. To receive without welcoming, to prepare without purpose, to dress every room like a guest might appear from the past. The illness is not dramatic, not spoken aloud. It begins with longer naps, missed meals, a footstep lighter than usual. Then the physician is summoned, not hurriedly, but as part of the day's rhythm, like watering the jasmine or turning the prayer rug so the sun fades it evenly. The physician enters without looking around. He is paid not to observe. The servants do not whisper. They move a little more carefully. That's all. The younger ones walk in stocking feet. The older ones wipe each doorknob after use. Not for health, but for order. The steward burns quince leaves in the corridor, and when the master coughs, he murmurs, "The air is thick today," though no one asked. Outside, the fig tree loses a leaf. Another. No one sweeps them yet. The sound of them gathering at the foot of the garden wall is not unpleasant. In the women's quarters, a quiet adjustment occurs. The elder wife sits longer in the sunlight. Amina sets aside her embroidery altogether. Layla, now of age, now spoken of, sits with her back straighter than before. She listens to everything. She says almost nothing. When the steward delivers an extra bowl of fruit, no one comments. When a length of silk is brought to the bath, no one asks who requested it. The house does not change, but the fabric of its stillness begins to thicken, like wool soaked in winter dye. The master begins to write again. Not letters, not ledgers, only short lines, folded into squares and left in books, drawers, and bowls. None are addressed. Some are phrases. The rug we forgot to fold. A place where guests no longer knock. When the sky stopped reflecting. Others are smaller still. 9 knots, then pause. Too much cumin. She did not look up. The steward finds them while dusting, and places them in a lacquer box in the study. He does not read them all. He does not destroy them. They are not secrets. They are sediment, what settles after the music stops. One day, the master walks alone to the farthest room in the house. It has no official name. Some call it the garden room, though it overlooks only a narrow strip of stone with moss between the tiles. Others call it the mirror room, though the mirror inside is cracked and covered with cloth. He enters. He closes the door. No servant follows. Inside, the light is thin, filtered through carved screens. It falls on the rug, folded twice in the corner. He does not unfold it. He sits beside it. The floor is cold. The silence complete. He does not speak. He listens. To the wind through plaster. To the bird tapping once on the window and then flying on. To the faint creak of the cushion as his weight shifts slightly. He breathes out, and the rug stays folded. The elite are not remembered for what they say, only for what they own. Houses, titles, streets, sometimes a book, rarely a rug. The master once owned 37 rugs. Now only 5 are used. 2 are kept in trunks. One covers a bed that no one sleeps in. The last is folded, waiting beside him. Not fine, not famous, but placed there, as if it always knew he would come. The house does not mourn. It prepares. The meals are smaller. The tea stronger. The cushions thinner, easier to carry. The garden is swept of leaves. The rugs beaten, not too hard. The lanterns checked for oil. Visitors will come. Not yet, but soon. They will walk the long corridor, and the rugs will not greet them, but they will hold them just the same. The master does not die loudly. No cries, no final requests. He fades, like a chalk line in sun. One morning, the steward enters the garden room and finds the cushion empty. The folded rug is still there, but a slip of paper rests on top. It reads, "I was only trying to see what the thread remembered." After the funeral, the guests comment on the arrangement of the house, the symmetry, the stillness, the carpets, all perfectly placed. Someone remarks that the place feels untouched. Someone else says it smells like quince and sleep. They do not stay long. They never do. The rugs are swept after they leave. No one says where their shoes went. A year passes, then another. The rooms remain. The light continues its slow walk across the walls. The fig tree drops its fruit. Amina leaves. Layla does not. The elder wife stays and watches the wind from the veranda. The steward burns rose stems in the evenings, though no one notices the scent. The house has changed, but no one says so. That is its final grace, to continue pretending it has not. One morning, a child walks through the cool hallway. Not a servant, not quite family, just someone who grew up between the silences. She sees a door ajar, the garden room. Inside, the folded rug remains. She touches it, soft, unassuming. She does not unfold it. She does not ask. She sits beside it and breathes. Outside, the city wakes. The dye pots bubble. The sheep are sheared. A loom groans into rhythm. And somewhere, weaver knots a pattern she does not recognize. A line of vines. A field of sky. A rug meant for no one. Made for the sake of making. For the sake of what the thread remembers. And so we come to the end of our story. The thread gently set down. The loom quiet once more. Somewhere in the past, a weaver's hands rest. A lantern flickers out. A courtyard slips into shadow. And yet, somehow, it all lingers. In the pattern of our days. In the silence between thoughts. In the small, ordinary things we touch without thinking. A pot of tea steaming softly. A thread caught on a sleeve. The sound of footsteps on warm stone. These moments are not so far from the ones we've spoken of tonight. History does not end. It only settles. Like dust. Like memory. Like breath. If this story brought you a sense of stillness or a gentle wonder, you are warmly invited to like, or subscribe, or share it with someone who could use a little peace. And if you haven't yet, feel free to leave a comment, just to say where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. There's something comforting in knowing how far and wide our quiet company reaches. For now, rest well, dream gently, and come back tomorrow, or the next day, for another story waiting in the stillness. Good night, and thank you for listening.